Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and this is the Eve Universe Show's continued coverage of the CSM 17, this time with Mark Resurrectus. He's a wormholer, by the way. How's it going, Mark?
Yes, wormholer, by the way, wormholer every day. Hello, friends. I am Mark. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Hello, hello, hello.
Now, we chatted a year ago when you ran.
We did.
But at that point, there was a pretty active wormhole field.
There was, yeah. There were 4 or 5 really good candidates last year. I was fortunate enough to run in a fairly dense field at a wormhole space. Learned a lot from those people. Had a lot of great ideas come out of that. And some people who ended up, in the running in the end, and some people who had to drop out for various reasons. But this year there are much fewer.
Yeah, it feels like most of the people I've talked to so far, at least, are saying like they can cover wormholes because of some previous experience or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume this isn't just because of like who I've happened to interview so far. I think you're the first like full-fledged. Well, I guess I did interview somebody else from Turbo Feeder and Glory already, but like you're one of the biggest like wormholer by the way candidates so far. Is there any other big wormhole candidates?
There are not. There are some other wormhole candidates or wormhole adjacent candidates. I think Leventi is a wormhole adjacent. Ithaca.
Dare I ask what you did with all of the other guys?
They're in a basement somewhere. I asked not to know where. It's honest to God, I think it's a couple different things. I think it is probably a mixture of two things. One, I certainly feel that we as the wormhole community are a little bit more organized this year than we have been in years past. There were a handful of us who kind of got together a couple months ahead of time and talked about, what the prospect of CSM looks like this year for us, and what our chances are of getting somebody on this year. I spoke to, another one of the major candidates from last year, Teddy GBYC from Outfoxed,
yep.
Who I thought was going to run this year. And he decided to step out of it for a variety of reasons. But that was kind of the impetus, I think, from my camp and my point of view to say, like, if there's going to be a year that we're going to do it, it's going to be this year, right? There are a lot of things that are kind of converging. The planets are aligning, so to speak, for us. So, and the other part of it too is, and this is something that I'm no doubt going to gripe on the rest of the day, but there are really just fewer active wormholers now than I think there've probably ever been, going back even to the beginning of the game. And that is unfortunate. And there are a lot of people who I think would probably be great candidates who just aren't as active as they have been in the last couple of years. There are, people who I think could potentially run, but are either they feel disenfranchised or they are disillusioned by the entire process. And they don't have any kind of interest to run for that reason. There are a multitude of things.
Let's drill into that for a little bit.
Sure.
Because last year, I talked to a bunch of wormholers, and like we put a lot of focus on wormholes, and we talked about the issues that each of the wormholers had. There were a few key points that a lot of people agreed on, or at least had a position on, right?
Right.
The biggest two being the use of filaments in wormholes.
Correct.
And surgical strike and its negative impact on the game.
Yes.
Without a CSM member, you guys have gotten both of those things. Why are we now in a worse state?
I would argue that we've really only gotten one and a bandage for the other. The filament change was a change that was headed specifically by a handful of people, but my understanding is that it was a topic that was brought up through conversations between current CSMs and CCP and ASHI, also have outfoxed, who had a kind of had an ongoing discussion about those filaments. And my understanding is that the CCP just didn't realize it was such a big deal, and once it was kind of brought to their attention, they realized it was problematic. So that was a great change. That being said, as far as the surgical strike changes, there are still some lingering issues. The bulkheads change that came out, that patch fairly recently, that has solved not didn't really solve the issues that we were seeing before. It has bandaged some of that content that we felt like we were missing. But the larger issues, namely the fax changes that were implemented during surgical strike, and
Diminishing returns.
no, the fact that you can't fit more than, or the way that you fit injectors on faxes.
Oh Jesus, that was all that same patch.
It was all the same patch.
Holy crap!
That
Okay.
And it was problematic.
Yeah.
And it was problematic for a couple different reasons, but the biggest one has to do with the way wormhole fights happen, right?
Right.
Because when you aren't able to reinforce the same way in J space that you are in K space, especially during like null fights. You can't just sino in more people, right? There has to be an active element to actually moving people into a fight, depending on where the fight's taking place. A lot of preparation goes into that. There are a lot of different parties involved. You don't just have a set number of jump gates or ansiblexes that you have to take to get there. You can't bridge into a fight. There has to be work done ahead of time to get you there, right? And for that reason, having that triage on grid, triage that can stand up for itself, and can defend both itself and the fleet that it's taking care of, is important, especially for. And I want to be clear when I say this too, because people assume that this is kind of a relevant thing for all regions of space. It's less relevant for low class space. But there are other issues that I want to address for low class space as well. But for the highly vaulted, high class armor brawls that were a huge deal for such a long time, the fact that that triage was nerfed in J space really made a big difference, because now, especially when prior to the resistance buff, those the faxes were basically hit on 3 different fronts. They both had lower resistances themselves. The ships they were trying to keep up had lower resistances, so their reps were worth less, both for themselves and remotely. And also, they had a harder time keeping up against new attacks from Balgorns, or like Mass Lashak with newts in their highs.
Right.
So that's just something that you can't compensate for with adding more triage, because generally you've only got the ones that you can fit through your connection, and you have a maximum probably of 2, and that is stressing it. And honestly, most groupers would only ever bring 1. So the number of hoops you had to jump through to find fits that would have some semblance of similarity to how they were before was nuts. The amount of money you would have to put into these fits were kind of crazy.
Right.
And so a lot of groups just stopped. They just didn't feel triage at all. And those groups suffered as a result of it. I mean, each apostle is 12 guardians at least. And so all of a sudden now you have to have pilots who fly those guardians, and that's taking away from support ships, that's taking away from DPS. And there are a lot of groups who that was what they had to rely on. They had to rely on putting more people into Logi, because they didn't have the option of fielding triage, because triage was just bad. And so when we talk about the bulkhead change, or I guess I've been calling it the battleship change, because it's really that's where we've seen the biggest dividend so far. The reintroduction of Shax Online,
Right. Bolstered bulkheads.
for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
The change to resistances was good, not, I think, to the extent that we were all hoping it would be. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. If I had it my way, it would just be a full rollback of that change. I'm realistic, I think, and knowing that that's probably not likely. So as much as I'm happy that we got something, but I still think that the fax changes are something that CCP can do to bring that play style back, which would immediately bring back, I think, more people to the game to play the game who have, for a long time felt like they have been either disregarded or disenfranchised again. And that's obvious from my point of view, because I see it strictly as you're giving people something that they want, and then they will pay money to play your game. And if you've heard anything that I've said so far about, especially in the last couple shows that I've been in, I fully understand the plight of CCP as a business. I understand Pearl Abyss has bottom lines that they are trying to meet, and I understand that they are probably under a lot of pressure to meet those numbers. That being said, the best way you can get more money into your game is by having more people play your game. And the best way you can bring more people in is to make them feel like they have something that they either didn't have before or something that they have lost.
Right.
So, I mean, it was not that long ago that our player count was over 30,000 players. The reason that it has dropped so far has been because CCP, as a result of changes, I think that were maybe not ill-intentioned but ill-executed, have pushed a lot of those players out. So.
Right. Well, and I think that that's why I'm encouraged by things like the heraldry system being folded into the game in order to encourage people to, play the game
Sure.
as a way of like making it more exciting. I don't think that's going to fix the problem, but it shows that CCP agrees with you, at least on some level.
I think it shows, and the heraldry system to me, and I mentioned this on another show, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. The heraldry system feels like panic, right? And I'll explain here in a second what I mean. But the heraldry change, the increase to the subscription fee from $15 US to $20 US.
Mm-hmm.
It feels to me like that is a symptom of panic somewhere on CCP's end, where they're saying we need to find a way to bring these numbers up because we are in a dire state right now, and here's a simple thing that we can give people to make that happen, which is good. Panic is not bad in this situation because it clearly has opened their eyes to something that has been obvious to a lot of people for a long time. My concern is that it does not go far enough.
Right. Panic or not, we're addressing the same problem. That's what I was trying to say.
I spoke earlier today on Talking in Stations at length with Phantomite and Rain, and when I was talking to them, I said it's kind of crazy to me that CCP doesn't have like an in-depth print-on-demand merch shop, right? Like I made the joke.
They do. There is a merch shop, but it's ridiculously bad.
It's not good. It's not good. Let me use an example. So I've got this poster back here, this propaganda piece that I made. It's got.
I was going to compliment you on your branding.
You. I appreciate it. I've got the same image on a shirt.
Yeah.
This shirt cost me $15. $15 for this shirt. They made one and they sent it to me, and it cost me $15. My alliance, we're a small alliance. We're only 250 tunes, probably less than 50 total people. We have a merch shop where anybody can go online and, I can put designs up on whatever I want, jackets, t-shirts, hoodies, and we've done plenty of stuff of our own. There are plenty of meme items up there that people can pick from. And they have, I had, one guy today buy 2 shirts from our alliance that made our alliance a little bit of money. Now, granted, I'm not marking our stuff up very high because I really only use that money for website costs.
Yeah,
I don't hold on to any of it. But if you were in the interest of making money off this stuff, you could do so pretty easily. I made $9 off of those 2 shirts, and that went back towards server costs and shipping a little bit, I think. But if CCP wanted to, I guess the point I'm getting at is that that's an easy thing to do. It costs me no money to set it up, really. And it generates, latent cash that I don't have to have any input in every day. Like they could, especially for CCP, Phantomite made the point, just put ships on shirts. That's really all people want. This is an easy way for CCP to generate money to help offset some of the current financial issues they seem to have mired themselves in. And again, it just goes back to the same issue as before. You find a reason to give more people more reason to play the game. More people are going to pay to play the game, and more people are going to buy the merch that you generate from the game.
So I think that out of all of the interviews I've done so far, I have not yet felt more personally attacked than just now. But I accept your criticism. It's good feedback. I'll
What?
go back and circle back with you on it. No,
What?
I do want to. I kind of want to go back to what we were talking about before, though,
Sure.
and I want to establish a little bit of terminology just for some people that may not necessarily be like wormholers, by the way. So,
Mm-hmm.
a low class wormhole would be like something like a C1 through a C3,
C4.
C4.
Mm-hmm.
And then a high class wormhole is C5, C6,
That
basically,
is
right?
correct. Yes.
Surgical Strike was an expansion that saw, as Mark alluded to, a lot of changes that made it so that, high close range ammo went up,
Yep.
resistances were slashed on modules, like resistance. Basically, every resistance module was bumped down a notch in
Correct.
its power level. And it just had all kinds of untold damage. And so, when they use these terms, this is what we're talking about,
Correct.
because it fundamentally changed the way that combat works. But going back to what I mentioned earlier, like, I understand that it wasn't all the way, but if we're in a more dire position than we are now, the two biggest things were addressed, at least in part, right? Like the filaments are fixed, and
Sure.
surgical strike is at least partially restored, so, or undone, I guess. So, like, isn't it a bad sign that things have gotten worse when it comes to the population?
The way I see it, it's kind of like a drowning man, right? Like somebody has fallen overboard and they have gone under. And the time to throw them a life raft was 3 years ago or 2 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could have maybe saved them at that point by throwing that life raft over. Um, Now we have thrown them a life raft, but they are already down, right? You need to perform more action than just throwing them a life raft. You need to perform CPR, like you need to get their heart started again.
Right. Yeah, I
So
I talked to another nullsecker about this. Like, because this is part of a bigger issue, right? Like,
mhm,
where the overall population has gone down, and like everybody's kind of seeing this problem. And there's a bunch of actually, it wasn't a nullsecker, it was RCF, but either way,
yeah,
like this idea of how do we get them back? Because it's not just a lack of interest. It's not just a lack of the content. There is a certain amount of hurt feelings and broken trust. How
correct.
do we help these people love again?
I think you have to go into it with a good faith approach, right? And that takes a lot from the point of the developers, because effectively what you're doing is asking the developers to give people something and expect not a lot in return. Um, just expect not a lot in return, because it is possible, albeit I think probably unlikely, that they could do all this work to bring the game back to a point that feels comparable to the way it was some years ago, and nobody responds to it positively, and nobody comes back. That is, I think, like I said, I think it's unlikely, because I do still strongly feel that there are an abundance of people who want Eve to be good. They want the game to be good because they enjoy the game, they enjoy the communities they played with, um, and they want to be part of it again. They feel like they have been pushed out, and they want something that is going to, they want some change that is substantial enough that they feel like CCP is not just doing CCP stuff again. They want to see something that matters, right? And currently they're not seeing something that matters. The bulkhead change was a positive change. I think everybody agrees that that was moving moving the dial in the right direction. But I can tell you right now that the day that that patch dropped, there were a couple people who were pretty excited about it. I was sitting in the Wormholer Discord that day, just kind of listening to people talk. I was pretty excited about it too, because I saw it as incremental change that was moving in a positive direction. But there were a lot of people who felt even maybe more slighted by that change, because it really does feel like saying to a drowning man, well, here's a life raft, figure it out. Like, you asked for something, we gave you something, without
So
really addressing the core issue at the heart of the thing.
so what's it going to take? Is it a balance issue? Is there mechanics that need addressing? Is it a content issue? There needs to be something that draws people back into it. How do we get to a good state?
I have ideas, ideas that I've come up with myself, ideas that I have gotten from, um,
Oh,
people. Oh, my video's frozen. Oh
yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah, it's my fault. Go
Oh,
on.
okay. Ideas that have been discussed in the same kind of circles that I run in. I would narrow it down probably to three things specifically. The surgical strike issue, the ongoing issue with faxes, are a lingering problem, and one that I don't know if we're going to see fixed, but I sure will keep talking about it until we see that rolled back, at least in JSpace. The problem is with that is that we know that they can make those kind of changes specific to certain regions, right? We
Right.
know that
Well,
they can do that because they do that currently.
does
Like,
it does a good wormhole space necessitate effective faxes, or
I,
do we get a good wormhole space somewhere some other way?
for high class space, I believe it does.
Okay.
I believe I'm just going to say it straight up. I believe it does.
Yeah, I'm not doubting you.
I,
I just that's why I asked
I
you the
don't
question.
think that's the no, that's fair. And I don't think it's the only thing that matters.
Oh,
But
sure.
I do think it matters because
Not sufficient, but necessary.
correct,
Yeah.
right. It's not keeping your heart beating, but it sure is nice to have that arm. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Um, there, I would also say that finding a way to to address frigate holes is probably something of a concern to a lot of people especially in high class space, and people will complain at this point that I'm kind of beating the high class drum, about frig holes, because people feel like frig holes are an inherent advantage strictly to defenders. Whenever there is uh, whenever there is some kind of eviction content happening in J space, which are, evictions get all the press because
Right.
they usually, the big numbers and everything, everybody shows up. But frig holes are emblematic of something that I really don't like, which is um, content without what's even the word I'm looking for? There's no counterplay for it, right? When a frigate hole spawns, which, just to reference for your viewers in case they don't know what it is, a frigate hole is any wormhole that spawns between. They can spawn between two wormholes, or they can spawn between a wormhole and someplace in K space. Um, and a frigate hole is any hole that only frigates and destroyers can fit through. There are mass limitations. You can't fit a cruiser through a frigate hole. And the problem with frigate holes is that they can very easily be used to move massive amounts of people through a wormhole. Using shuttles. A lot of groups will stock their own home defenses, and so if you are defending and you get a frigate hole, all you have to do is have all your buddies get in shuttles, and they can go through this hole that can't be collapsed because it regenerates mass whenever people move through it, so you can't put mass on the hole. Years and years ago, Hard Knocks tried it by putting thousands, and not thousands, but several hundred passes through a hole with destroyers, and we're not able to put any mass on the hole at all.
Right.
They
Yeah, yeah.
cannot.
The mass required. So wormholes
Right,
have two different stats: the amount
right.
of mass that it takes to collapse it, and the
And the time
amount
it
of mass that can transverse it at one time.
correct.
Frigate holes have a very small amount that can pass through at one time and a very
Mhm.
large total amount. Now, it used
Well,
to be that you could cheese this a little bit by blooming your mass halfway through, but they
correct.
fixed that.
It was a bug. The ability to roll frigate holes was a bug.
Right.
Um, and so it's for that reason I don't think that we're ever going to see that reverted. I don't think CCP is ever going to be willing to revert back to a point where, they say, oh, this bug was, a boon to the game, and we're going to, put the bug back in.
Well, I don't
I
think
think
the
that's
bug was good. I think that maybe you
no.
could rebalance the amount of mass in theory, but like
I
the
don't
fact
even.
that
I
it
don't,
worked that way is just weird.
I think the people will, I think that frig holes have value.
Right.
I like the idea of a way, that people can, that adds some kind of counterplay to eviction content, because I don't like eviction content. It's my least favorite to participate in, both defending and evicting. It's just very boring for the most part, and I wish there were better content drivers in wormhole space, which we'll get to here in a second. But the problem with frigate holes is that they last so goddamn long.
Right. Well,
They are full life wormholes, and you cannot reduce their mass, so they last as long as they're going to last, and then they go away naturally. One of the suggestions that we've made in the past about the way to deal with that is have them spawn in at end of life, so they would only exist for roughly, at a maximum 3 hours. So that while they're there, that is a time that you could potentially get people in if you need to get in defenders, or if you need to get in pods. If you're an evicting group and you've had some people potted out, you could get more people back in that way. But they don't last, the full gamut of time that a normal wormhole lasts. If you're going to have a system in place that cannot be counterplayed, without, the effort that has to go into counterplaying a frig hole is almost unrealistic. Some groups are able to do it with, mass Stormbringers, basically, sitting on a wormhole, because you can't smart bomb on a wormhole either. You have to be outside of smart bomb range on a wormhole to hit the smart bomb, and because you generally spawn inside of the wormhole range, it's just very hard to set up and be accurate with it without a ridiculous number of smart bombing battleships around the hole. So,
and it's also being pointed out that frigate holes regenerate mass, where
correct.
other wormholes do not. So it's even more absurd of a concept. But I want to push back a little bit at this idea,
Sure.
But I also want to agree with you right afterwards. So,
Okay.
I don't necessarily agree that it's a problem that this is happening, but also by the end of your explanation, I think that you don't necessarily feel that way either, because you said that like having small windows of opportunity that people might be able to come in, if Bob so wills it, then congratulations, you managed to get lucky during the middle of your siege and you can sneak
Sure.
people in. I think that I like the idea that there's a certain amount of reward to having the stockpile. We have the ships here. We just need the bodies to fill them. Like, that is actually, in my opinion, a pretty decent state to be, to allow and to have.
I agree with that as well. And that's why I've never advocated for removing them entirely.
So now I get to agree with you. Ready?
Right.
From the other side of the coin, even if you were to agree with you and like evictions are bad and all that stuff, from a crabber's point of view, that frigate hull kills your content for as long as it exists. You can roll all your hulls, you can stopgap them or whatever, but if you've got a frigate hull, you're not running sites, or at least you're going to, within a couple of hours probably get dropped on or whatever. You can't control it. Your entire thing for the night is upset. So if there's one generic thing that we can say about it, is that frigate hulls kill content, right? It stops people from doing things.
Yes. I would say to your point about crabs, I would never be so bold as to make comments that would imply that I'm trying to balance things in such a way that would make life easier for crabs. But at the same time, I agree. Yeah, fair. I agree with you to one point, though, is that when frig holes appear, crabs just aren't going to crab. Right. I think that if frigate holes existed in a state where they were they did not exist for such a long time and that they spawned in EOL, you would have
unreliable.
They would be unreliable and unpredictable, I guess is the better word I'm looking for, because in that state I think it would be more likely for crabs to look at those holes and be like, we're probably fine, and then you would have them go out and rat anyway. And then if you happen to be so lucky to come across one of those holes and get in while somebody is crabbing, that is that's content for you. I just think that reducing the impact of those holes on the on gameplay as a whole, um, would create more content by virtue of making people more likely to try and do things while they are around, and more likely to, um, less likely to straight up kill content in, eviction games, for example, right? Like,
Right. Yeah, and
there.
that's my point. Yeah, I agree. If we make it so that they're significantly shorter and also potentially last for a randomized amount of time within
Mhm.
that bound, now it's no longer a foregone conclusion. Because I mean,
Agree.
like, I'm not really a wormholer, by the way, but like I know people that have, and I've been on comms with people when they're doing these kinds of things, and it's like, oh, a frig hole opened. I guess we come back tomorrow because you know for a fact that you've got nothing for the next period of time.
I am
Whereas if
also
it's only going to last maybe an hour, you might
right.
hang out and check out to see whether or not what happens with it.
Correct,
But
absolutely. And I would actually, and I want to interject here too,
sure,
because I've also heard, I've heard other suggestions as well, and these aren't things that I have ever uh, campaigned on as a platform idea, but they are ideas that I find interesting. The prospect of increasing the frequency of freak hole spawns if you reduce the amount of time that they exist. So you're
right,
not, you're effectively, because that also increases the complexity of that counterplay, because if a freak hole exists for 12 hours, right, and you know where it's at, and it is there for that amount of time, it is very easy for you to put together a whole bunch of people and go to that place and then get in.
right, yeah,
Whereas
totally,
if you have holes that last for, an hour and a half to 2.5 hours at a time, you have multiple of them that show up in different places throughout the 3 or 4 days that you're running an eviction. That makes it more difficult on whoever's trying to get in, while also still giving them the opportunity to do so if they have the competency to make it happen. You know what I mean?
right.
Now, like I
Well,
said, I go ahead.
the
Sorry.
other thing about this, I'm sorry, you've got me kind of excited by this idea, because like if they close faster, then that
Hmm.
means that in theory they would also cycle faster.
Correct.
So you would have more evictions. It would be more likely during an eviction that a frigate window will open,
Hmm.
but that frigate window will be shorter. I like this because it encourages people to be paying attention and to be more engaged. It goes back to like with the crabbing thing, right? Right. Rather
Right.
than just giving up completely, it's worth watching to see what happens. I'm not going to just give up. When it comes to an eviction, it's about having eyes open so that way you can capitalize on that one window of opportunity that you're hoping that Bob brings to you in the next day and a half or whatever,
Correct.
2.5 days.
So I want to use actually an example, and this was posted in chat, so I'm going to kind of explain it a little bit, since I know chat won't be involved in the final product
Sure.
here. One of my people came by and posted a link to a battle report from the other night. It was my group who put together. We had a fleet of Kikimoras and a handful of sabers and general tackle, who found 6 paladins, 2 legions, a vindicator, and a Nestor running sites in a I think it was a C5, correct? Let me double check, make sure I'm not talking out my ass. It was a C6. I lied. It was a C6, right? They were ratting in that hole on the other side of an end of life frig hole. Now, I don't know for a fact. I've not spoken to the guys who we jumped on. They have a pretty robust system, I think, set up. They're probably making pretty good money. So I don't think the fact that we swamped 6 paladins is probably going to break their backs too badly. But at the same time, that is an example of where I cannot say with the same kind of certainty that I would say, knowing that the hole was end of life, that they probably went into it thinking, well, it's an EOL hole, it's probably fine, we can run these sites. If it was a
Sure.
fresh and if it was a fresh frig hole, chances are probably much less likely, because if it's fresh, or it has not even gone, it hasn't gotten to the point where it's even begun end of life yet, then you're sitting here looking at it going, well, if somebody gets a single scout in here, they're going to have at least 2 or 3 hours to form for us
Yeah.
and come in here.
I call this the time to death timer, right?
Correct.
How long do I have from perfectly safe to I'm dead, right?
And the thing is, we didn't need 3 hours to prep for that fight. We
Right.
had all of our stuff together. We were lucky to find the connection. We have one guy who was really on the ball with it, and found the connection and found the crabs in there, and we were able to put all of our stuff together in less than 15 minutes. So it's not like the content goes away. From my point of view, it makes the content more likely because you have people who are more willing to engage with that kind of with going out there and putting expensive ships on grid because they feel a certain amount of confidence that maybe they shouldn't feel about how long they actually have and how long it would take people to form to fight them, right? So it is my opinion, and it is the opinion of I think a lot of different people who talk about this kind of thing, that if CCP isn't going to remove frig holes, there are some people who think that they should just straight up remove them. I don't agree with that. I want to be pretty clear. I don't agree with the idea that we should just remove frig holes. But putting some counterplay back into it or limiting the damage that those frig holes can do without counterplay, I feel like is the way to move forward with it. So you're not damaging play styles. Instead, you are giving people the ability to adapt in a creative way.
Yeah. It blows my mind that they have that many paladins and they're not ready to jump them away.
Yes, buck wild too. Not a single one of them had an MJD.
That's
crazy.
Nuts.
They were streaming too, which was kind of nuts. We had one of our guys who was watching their stream when it happened. And it is kind of crazy. You could watch.
Crazy.
Just kind of dumb. I mean, not I'm sure they've done it before, and they are streamers, so they're going to stream their content. If their content's crabbing that night, then Godspeed. But
yeah. The nice thing about doing streaming wormhole stuff is it's like doing it on a stream generally doesn't increase the likelihood that somebody's going to gank you, because simply knowing where you are is insufficient. Knowing what system you're in is insufficient to actually do something with in a wormhole.
You have to find a way in too. Yeah. Right. And in this case, it was just very unfortunate for them. And I felt a little bad, but like I said, they're crabbing with 6 paladins and a C6 Magnetar. I'm sure they're doing just fine. It was very funny. If you watch the stream, you can see kind of the moment of realization on the poor guy's face when the Eris lands and goes bubble up. And it does not get better for them from that point on. So
what I find wild about this is that, like, you're even numbers.
Yeah. The problem with that fight for them was that we were in a magnet, and Magnetars have a tracking debuff. So as long as we were able to keep range out of their smart bombs, there was nothing they could do to hit us. They couldn't track us.
Paladins?
Well, because paladins are really good at killing rats. They're really good at killing rats. And they had... So when we landed, the first thing we did was we scrammed the Vindicator and we scrammed the Nestor and boosted everything else off, ourselves included.
Right.
So the Vindy and the Nestor stayed behind because the Nestor was where they were getting their primary reps from. Their secondary reps were the Legions, and we killed those first. And the Vindicator, is great for that kind of thing because you can mitigate the issues with tracking just by putting Vindy webs on something. I mean, if you can web it down to less than 10 meters per second, it doesn't matter how bad your tracking is. You can still swamp things with paladin guns without too much trouble. Paladins are maybe the preferred crabbing marauder right now. They do a lot of things really well. They aren't the best for the fight that we took for their part. The tracking was kind of problematic for them, and they weren't. I mean, they were strictly buffer fit paladins. They had no local reps, so we were just able to chunk through them. And especially in the Magnetar, Kikimora guns at full spool are not kind to marauders. So, and we lost 2 of them. We lost 2 of our Kikis pretty early, because of one of them just got. I think one of them got wrecking shot. That clipped him pretty hard, and he got caught by a smart bomb. So, we were fortunate, but again, I go back to the idea that this was a situation where I don't believe that content would have existed if they hadn't been as sure as they were that the frig hole was not going to be a problem because it was EOL.
We can't just stick to this one kill report we could probably talk about this for a while.
Sure.
40% of the damage on the Nestor is them, right?
Yeah, well, it's that's a little it doesn't tell the full story because they had been running sites for a while. They were smart bombing, so
Oh,
it picked up smart bomb damage, and they had just been shooting rats too. So I don't know if the rat damage, if the drifter damage shows up on there. But what we did was we waited until they were finished with the very last site. They had just finished the drifter, and we
right.
sent the Eris over, and we only knew they were just about to finish the drifter because they were streaming it at the time.
Got it.
Which again, ill-advised. I would not probably do that if it were me.
Yes, it doesn't necessarily give anybody intel that's watching the stream, but if somebody finds you, it gives them intel.
Correct. Yeah, kind of weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, frig holes, my number 2 thing. Number 3 is just content drivers as a whole. Because we had talked about some. If I was going to work on trying to bring people back into J space, I think the easiest way to bring more people into J space is to find reasons for them to want to be there. And if PvP players want want players that they can hunt, right? And that is the goal of hunters, is to find prey in that kind of predator prey ecosystem, right? I think the best way to do that right now, given the tools we have currently, is to make gas mining, is to buff gas mining in wormholes.
Hmm.
Um, I think that, well, and it accomplishes a couple different things. One, it already exists. We already have gas sites and wormholes. So there's already infrastructure in place for a lot of groups to go out and mine that gas. I would like to see. We memed a little bit last year about the idea of gas workholes. Something that I have gone at length talking about over the last couple of months is the idea of wanting to see workholes return to wormholes. And people always kind of assume that I mean that I want to go back to Works Online, which is not true. Um, I understand that workholes were pretty bad for the health of the game for the as
Sorry.
long as they were.
The phrase is "reign of the Rourke Wall." That's the nomenclature.
Yes,
Get it
sorry,
right.
Reign of the Rorqual. Yes, but
We may not be able to agree on the names of our wars, but
that is fair. The benefit of having Rorks in J space are that you don't have them sitting underneath a super cap umbrella.
right.
You
Yeah.
you cannot jump a super fleet to a Rorqual mining in a gas or in a site or on a moon in J space. You're limited to whatever local fleet you have nearby that you can bring. And so if you find a Rorqual, if you roll into a Rork mining in a wormhole, that is guaranteed content, because either you kill the Rork and then nobody comes to defend it, or they show up with something to try and defend it.
Right.
And that
And then as the Rourke Wall pilot, you at least know that when it dies, it's at least going to be interesting, right? It's not going to
correct.
just be
Yeah.
some bullshit, right? Like, because what can come in is also limited.
So we've talked, when we talk about gas sites, we were talking about, giving Rorquals gas mining, either gas drones or, a gas harvester themselves so they can huff gas as a way to introduce. Because, gas too now is extremely valuable for capital production. And, Nullsec is interested in capital prices going down. The way you can help ease that from an economics point of view is increase the supply of gas in J space. If you increase the supply of gas in J space, what you do is you're going to get people who want to come out there and want to huff that gas, because they know it can turn them a profit, because they know people are going to use it for capital production elsewhere.
Right.
The
Well,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I have an interesting thought about this, which is like, so last year the question was about the filaments, and
Yes.
the problem was that people that were being evicted could get their shit out.
Correct.
This year we're talking about frig holes, which is
Mhm.
allowing people that are under eviction to bring proper defenses in. We also just got the structure changes, which makes it way easier to knock on doors to look for primary, good targets and whatnot to knock over. I feel like, just from what having my ear to the ground, the increasing nature, the more rampant nature of evictions has been the real reason why we've seen less and less of a population in wormhole space. Not that there aren't things to do there aren't ways to make money, but rather that the evictions of inevitable. Like when you're talking about the profitability, if your structure's being knocked out every few months, that kind of impacts the profitability. Do you think that is
I
it
agree with you, but not necessarily for the reason that you maybe think that I agree with you.
okay?
I hate eviction content. I hate running evictions. I hate defending in evictions. If my group is ever evicted, which is almost a certainty at some point, uh, especially if I were to happen to get on CSM, I probably will hate running that eviction or participating in that eviction as well. They suck really bad, and I think the reason we've seen so many people leave JSpace, people always kind of assume like it's, oh well, they got evicted so they left JSpace and they never came back. I think that's unlikely. In general, groups who are, if they get evicted and they don't come back, were groups that were probably on their way out anyway. Very rarely do groups, at least in my experience, and I'm speaking only anecdotally here, I don't have in front of me, but a lot of the groups that are evicted and have um, robust leadership structures and a strong culture, those groups come back anyway. I mean, hell, it wasn't too long ago that Singularity Syndicate, who's now one of the more robust alliances in all of Wormholes, was evicted by a combined fleet of Inner Hell, Hard Knocks, Laserhawks, um, Cryptid Gaming, and Wormhole Society. That was a
Right.
huge fleet that showed up to evict them, and they got evicted. And all of their stuff, I mean, they lost tons and tons of stuff. But at the same time, they were able to put their shit together. They moved into a C6, and now they live there and are, again, one of the major players in Wormholes. I think the issue with evictions is not just that it scares people who want to move into Wormholes, because if eviction content scares you, then you probably shouldn't be moving into Wormholes. Like, the whole
No.
point of living in J space is that nothing is for certain, right? And there are no certainties of safety outside of what you can keep in a freighter and what you can get out after the fact. Um,
Well,
but
I don't I disagree that it's I wouldn't say that it's afraid of it, but like and I also disagree that it doesn't discourage people because like there's a lot of people that dip their toes into it and
mhm.
then within 6 months or so they just get punched by a fleet of 50 plus people. You when that happens to you, you think, oh, we don't have the ability to operate in this area. We're going to go do something else. And I've seen this
I,
time and time again. So like I just feel like the rise of evictions and the lowering of population. The evictions started first. Like we saw increased evictions, and then we start seeing more and more complaints about the population. I just don't feel like this is a full accident, especially like I just find it interesting that the wormholers continue to ask for things that ultimately buff the evictors when I talk to people and it really seems like the being evicted ends up being the reason why we've seen a larger and larger consolidation of power and everyone else deciding it's not even fucking worth it because a 50 to 100 man fleet is coming sooner rather than later. That's not afraid. That's just a calculation.
those 50 to 100 man fleets are not evicting small groups. I mean, that's just straight up. If you're getting evicted in a group like that, you have had to have done something to somebody. In general, groups that size are only ever going to try and run evictions if they think it's going to make them money, if they think they're going to get good content out of it, or if somebody has shit in their yard. Right? That is just straight up. I don't know exactly what what references you were making there, but I can just say from my point of view, as far as my group is concerned, if a group is an active PvP group, we usually shy away from those unless they've done something pretty fucking stupid. We like to evict crabs because crabs are fun to evict, especially nullsec groups that have moved into JSpace will absolutely evict those too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in general, groups, unless you're sitting on a huge, dragon's hoard of loot that hasn't been touched in years, and we think that you don't have the ability to defend your own stuff, then you're probably going to get left alone, especially if you give fights. That is why groups like mine are as adamant as we are about taking fights, is because it's that's why you play the game, and two, because people are less likely to give you that kind of shit if you at least make an effort to take those fights, or
Right.
you know, bring friends to take the fights with you. So I would disagree that the evictions came first. The evictions happened because content started to dry up, and I think a lot of the reason you've seen those player numbers and wormholes start to dip is because it got to a certain point where the only content was eviction content.
Right.
And we can talk, night or day about whether or not that has been as detrimental for smaller groups or these hypothetical smaller groups that are being evicted all the time, or groups that are being evicted, period. I can tell you who it was absolutely detrimental for are groups that only ran evictions because they got tired of it after a while, and the only ones left are like the masochists who just get off on running evictions.
Well,
That's
I will
I
agree that. Sorry, go on.
no, you're fine. Go ahead.
No, I lost my point. Go on.
I guess the point I'm getting at is that I fully agree that there need to be better content drivers in wormholes. That's why I talk about rorquals. That's why I've talked about the there was an idea like an ESS light that was proposed in the wormhole Discord the other day. There have been some ideas floated around about that as a way to generate content inside of somebody's home without having to rely on eviction content as a way to, because timers are content. I mean, there's
Right.
no other way around it. Like a timer is guaranteed content. If you're going to form up for something, a timer is, for a fact that you are going to be able to shoot something if you have a timer.
Yeah.
And so that's why evictions were as big a deal as they were for such a long time, and still are to a certain extent. And finding ways that you can give people alternatives to those timers is how you bring those evictions down, and also a way that you bring people back to the game, because people hate running evictions. I don't know if there are very few people who run evictions right now who I can ask them and they will say with any kind of certainty that they love evictions, because
Right.
it's such boring content.
But the people doing the evicting hating it doesn't make it not bad for the people that are being evicted too. I mean, that just means that nobody's having fun with it. I will agree that this is
I agree with
at the
that
very
too.
least this is a negative feedback loop, right?
Right.
More less and less people means more and more consolidation, means that the few people that do grow outside of that gets, stomped. It stifles growth. There's less content. Even the the larger groups feel like they can't find any content. It gets worse and worse and worse. I don't know where the initiation of that was, like where the catalyst is. That is probably a really interesting thing to explore, like to go look at the history to see what really did happen first, because I'm sure you could like do that at some point.
I mean, there's enough written record, I think, that I agree with you, that you could probably find a place where but I mean, again, people still talk about it after, when Surgical Strike happened and when those fights, those big wormhole brawls stopped happening, people looked for other ways that they could generate content. There were a couple of big evictions back then. There were big evictions back then that were kind of spurred on by personal gripes, is what we'll say in that case. I mean, the eviction of Rage for Hard Knocks, the eviction of TD-Sen from Wormhole Space entirely, were both spurned on by, Casus Belli's, by, depending on who you talk to, one group or the other. And then, was that the beginning of a downward spiral? No, but you do get the impression that after that point, there wasn't an abundance of content that wasn't eviction content, so everybody just ran evictions.
Right. Well, around that same time, we also get quantum cores, which basically ensures a certain amount of value per the structure that you blow up, which was so like evictions were made more attractive while everything else was made less attractive. Mm-hmm. And I think that was an accelerator to an ongoing problem. But that's, like I said, that's worth exploring deeper another time, I guess.
I do want to address a comment that was made in chat, so I'm going to if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Because we have talked,
or a couple more questions. Yeah,
for sure. We've talked a lot about high class content already, and I talk about it a lot for a couple different reasons. One, I'm a high class wormholer. My group lives in high class. I want to see more action for my people in space, and a lot of our friends groups that we are familiar with, they also live in high class and they want to see that content come back too. I don't want to see anything happen in J space to the detriment of wormholers as a whole. And so whenever we talk about these changes, I always am interested in finding ways that we can implement changes that bring more content to more people without pushing other people out. So Lessican03 asks, as a low-class wormholer and one of the most active low-class corps, why should I vote for you? Because we don't use faxes and frighole fights are fun. The argument that being made there is not one that is unreasonable. I think a lot of people don't know what my positions are on low-class space because people always ask questions about the high-class issues.
High class is sexy.
High class gets all the
Likes to
press.
talk about it.
That's just the only. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Sure.
For low class space, there are things that I think could happen that would benefit low class space as a whole. I spoke not too long ago about how I wish. Well, I've spoken for a long time about how I wish they would fix C4 home sites. C4 space has a problem with home sites. There are going to be people who will sit here and tell you that they can be easily run with a Paladin
what's a home
drive. Sites that, so, when you talk about crabbing, right?
Oh, so the sites that spawn in AC4.
Correct. So they're different. They're effectively 3 different types of crabbing that happens in wormhole space. And the reason we talk so much about crabbing too is because crabbing right now is the only way to make money in J space. We don't have mining. The gas is fine, but it's not very abundant. So the only other thing you're left with is blue loot. And so the reason that's such a big deal to us is because that's the only way we can get that money. Mm-hmm. I disagree with that as a principle. I wish there were other avenues to generate income, even if that meant tuning down other avenues to make money. Right. That being said, there are 3 ways that you can crab. You can either crab at a farm where you set up a farm in a wormhole and then you run the sites in that wormhole. You can static crab where you are, groups will take, they'll roll their static and find a wormhole that they're connected to, generally C5s, and they'll run sites in those C5s. A lot of times people will call those roach fleets, right. Especially if they, those fleets go into places where they have farms.
That was the big one that was so famous last year.
Correct. And then you also have home site crabbing. And a lot of groups will subsidize their SRP or, structure maintenance or fuel for their structures with the money they make from their home sites. And you can do that fairly easily with C5 and C6 holes because you get the money's pretty good and the sites are not terrible to run. C4 sites are terrible to run. The spawns are bad. The amount of DPS you have doesn't really keep up with how much money you're making. They're not good to run. There are going to, like I've said, there are a handful of people who claim this is not a big deal. But for most groups running those C4 sites, doesn't matter if you're running them in Marauders or trying to run them in Dreads, because if you run them in Dreads, they can't escalate. They just suck to run.
Right.
They're not good. I think they should be worth
they're
more money.
They're the hardest of the bad sites, which makes them meh.
Yes. So that's the other thing too. We ran the numbers last year, and on the curve of how much how much you're getting back from your own sites, C4 sites are way off the curve. Right. C1, C2, C3 sites all are basically, they come up because there are more rats. The rats are harder to kill. The sites are more difficult. C4 sites, the rats themselves the DPS is keeping up, but the amount of money you are making does not.
Right.
So there's a gap between C3 ratting and C5 ratting. And currently C4 groups have a hard time, being able to, because there's a certain amount of safety with that too. That is the effective, that is the equivalent of ratting under your umbrella, right? Like being able to run sites in your own home where you have a response fleet that's only a warp away, compared to, if you're in a wormhole next door that you have to go to, right?
Right.
So you can crab to make up, for SRP or whatever, with a relative sense of safety in your home sites, and C4 groups currently cannot do that without some difficulty. So I've talked at length about wanting to boost the payout rate and fix the spawns in C4 sites. I also think that we should roll back the.
It's worth noting that because a lot of people that don't do wormholes might not realize this. I know I wouldn't have realized it, but buffing C4s in a weird way is also buffing C2s because, as
Yes.
you said, your static ratting, like
Mhm.
C2s are neat because they always have a case-based static and a wormhole static. So
Correct.
you would use that to farm. Well, a lot of them do connect to things like C4s and stuff like that. So
Right.
that would be their content.
And that is why, by the way, that the groups who move into C2s, a lot of those groups generally will move into holes that are. That's why C2 nullsec C5 statics are so popular,
Right. Well,
because
yeah.
you have nullsec content, and if you need to crab, you can crab out of your C5 static or find content through your C5 static that way.
But that makes
Um,
a fair chunk of the C2s meh at best.
Yeah,
Too.
people just don't live there. Or don't find any enjoyment, which is a shame because there are plenty of groups that live in C4s right now, and not many people who have C4 statics, so they don't run into them very often. I mean, we lived in a C4, not that long ago. We lived in a Wolf Riot for the better part of 2.5 years, and we rarely, if ever, had anybody roll into us via a C4 static. What was more likely was that we would connect people through our C5 or somewhere deep down our C3 chain. Being able to give people a reason to want to connect to C4s, even if it's just for crabbing, would give people a reason to want to move into those C2 holes that have C4 statics, and then they could use whatever other case-based connection they have to.
Isn't it a C4 highway? Isn't the whole point of C4s that they all connect to each other?
C5 highways.
Oh, it's C5. So it's not even that. Well, okay, great.
Yeah.
Well,
because there are a lot of C5s that connect to other C5s, and that's why you get long C5 chains.
So that's a really solid point. Absolutely. But we are getting really low on the time. And so I do want to make sure that we address this issue because I find it absolutely shocking that we made it all the way through one of the big wormholer candidates of the year. And we haven't really talked about the structure changes and the timer changes and its impact. So you mentioned Ashy earlier. I know that she was very upset by this change, and a lot of wormholers have been upset by the change. You seem to not be motivated by it.
I rarely, if ever, say this, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea when I do say it. But in this instance, I kind of agree with Brisk Rubal. Because Brisk made a comment on another show we were on either last week or the week before, where he said that it's too early to tell.
Right.
And I agree. I know it's super gross that I've said this, and Mr. Rubal, I hope you can understand why I'm saying these things. But the fact of the matter is, we are in a position now where it's very unlikely for CCP to roll the changes back. At least with any amount of time, right? I think we're going to have to live with it for what it is right now. My gut reaction was that I did not like the change. In fact, I told several people that I did not like the change. I thought it was unfair to small groups who rely on Astra houses to live out of, because effectively any Tom, Dick, or Harry could come by their wormhole, put them into a whole timer without too much counterplay. And then you're at risk of losing everything, which the losing everything isn't a problem, but it's the idea that you give people less time to prepare. And even if the timer itself is, pushed back, you still have the issue of, well, if we don't defend the next timer, that's it. We're done. Right. So that being said, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just to give it some framing. On the one hand, I feel like it's very clear that what CCP has basically tried to do is they've made it so that structures are modeled more off of POSs now, right? In fact, even the day-and-a-half timer that they originally offered really is reminiscent of the maximum stront timer of a POS. And so I could definitely see how the designer was like, well, we're just going to make medium structures like a POS. So
if that's their intention, they have not done it well.
Right. So the question that I've been having, though, is on the one hand, what I see as being the glaring issue is that these things have the quote unquote power of a POS, but not the auto defenses, and more importantly, 3 times or something like that or more the cost as a POS.
Well, and you can anchor a POS in less than an hour. You don't need a 24-hour timer to anchor a boss.
Right. So now it's just a bunch of extra bullshit and cost without any extra. I mean, like you get the benefits of not having to share, live out of one locker, but beyond that,
Correct.
um,
I
but then,
have said several times recently that it really does feel like they're trying to push Astra specifically into a more of a people use the term beachhead kind of structure,
right,
uh, which is something that we've asked for a while because people don't like passes and people would prefer to have something other than passes.
right. Which they've actually
Yeah,
suggested that they're going to be coming out with a new structure that fills that gap
which
too,
if
which is really bizarre.
which is great. If you're going to do that, then that's great. But I don't think Astra houses needed to take the brunt of. Like, I don't know why
And
the
all
change.
medium structures, not just Astros.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And the reason I say Astras or make a point about Astras is because Astras are people are more likely to live out of an Astra,
Fair enough.
because they're a little bit easier. They're more easy to defend than Raitarus or Athenors.
That's true.
So you're more likely to have people living in those structures.
Right.
If
Well,
they're going to introduce new beachhead structure, I don't know why you would make this change that would relegate Astras and other structures like that to a beachhead role. I mean, it's pretty clear the reason they made the change was to try and combat structure spam. I don't agree with the way that they've done that either.
Right. Well, so as originally my reaction was that the clear balance problem was that you modeled it off of POSIS without changing its price at all. Right. That
Right.
was my first reaction. And so my initial solution was, well, this is simple. Just make it so medium structures don't take cores anymore. Let it so that people can pull the cores out and sell them. And then we just don't have to worry about medium cores anymore.
Sure.
That was my solution. But then after talking to people like Ashy and other people, it comes down to the fact that it's so easy to strip the shields
Right.
that people are just going to be knocking it into it, and then you now have a final timer, and they
Yeah.
get to decide whether or not it's good for them, and that's a far smaller commitment than having two timers down the road, and so it just thins the barrier of entry of actually like initiating an eviction, which is a problem. Well, the thing
Go
that
ahead,
I
sorry.
find most interesting though is that I just talked to a high secker that felt the same way, that felt that shields are too easy to strip away, and that causes a lack of ability to react to things and a lack of ability to defend things. So it sounds to me like I'm actually hearing the shields part being a problem in multiple areas of space. Now I want to hand it over to you for your thoughts about what's going on.
Sure. Hang on a second. This light's fucking up. That's a bit better. I think that, and I this is something else that I have campaigned pretty heavily on over the last couple of weeks, and I want this to kind of be the driving point, because I get questions a lot too about, why should I vote for you if I'm not a wormholer? You're very clearly wormhole centric. You wormholes and JSpace as a whole, wormholers are very centric to your platform. Why should I give a shit about you if I live in low sec, or if I live in a null block, or if I mine in high sec? And this, I think, is kind of indicative of one of the things that I have been pretty adamant about, which is CCP's philosophy for how they patch the game and how they make changes over time is toxic. I don't believe, or at least I would like to not believe, that they are doing this intentionally, and they intentionally are aiming to make changes that harm the game. I feel like that's counterproductive, and it's not what they're trying to do. I think that there are plenty of competent people in within the halls of CCP in Iceland. But the fact of the matter is, very often they will make changes to one part of the game with the intention of fixing one issue that will then affect many other parts of the game unintentionally. And
Wormholers are the kings of collateral damage.
We have complained about this for a long time,
Sure.
but we're not the
It's like
we're
your
not the only
defining
one.
feature.
we're not the only ones affected by this too, and I want to be clear about that. We're not
Right.
the only people who are affected by this. Pochfin people who live in Pochfin are also affected by this. People who live in Lowsec are also affected by this. People who
Sure.
live in faction warfare may be the most affected by this. They've been effectively run into the ground. The fact that we're only now getting faction warfare, the promise of faction warfare changes like 7 or 8 years late is nutty, but again, just indicative of the problem with the way they iterate on the game. They see an issue and they say, okay, here's an issue in this one area. We're going to make a change to this structure or this ship or this resource to patch that change, and we're going to call it good, without considering that different regions of space are different and they act differently, and they, the people who live there play the game differently. You need to be able to find nuance in the way you patch the game. You need to be able to find a way to be creative about it without putting one, because the game's not one size fit all. People play the game differently. Somebody not that long ago, and I feel like this is probably another thing that Phantomite said, but it could have been anybody, because this is a thing that a lot of people agree on. Eve is many different games within one game. You have people who play the game in nullsec like an empire builder, and you have
500
people who play
games in a trench coat or whatever.
Exactly. I mean, you have people who play pirates online in low sec, or people who have are playing stealth missions in low class wormholes, going after data or relic sites. Like, it's just a lot of different games, and so you can't expect to be able to put a single patch that does one thing across the entire ecosystem is going to be a perfect fit for everybody. So we have that's a huge problem for us right now, and the structure change I feel like is indicative of that. Because if you want to cut down on structure spam, especially in nullsec, especially in highsec, there are ways that you can do that. There have been good suggestions about ways that you can reduce the effectiveness of those structures, make them easier to kill, while not absolutely crippling the groups that anchor them in the first place. But they didn't do that. What they decided to do instead was put one change that would affect every structure across the entire game, and now we all just have to live with it. And so we're not going to see it rolled back. We just have to find a way to get past it. So I agree that it's probably too early to tell how big of a difference this is going to make. I think this is going to do one of two things, primarily for wormholers, is it's going to drive people who can afford it into Fortizars, which make them bigger targets for anybody who happens to find a Fortizar that the group who lives there can't defend it.
Yeah, large structures are a much bigger target on their back.
They are a much bigger target, and we've already talked about the fact that there is not an abundance of other content and outside of eviction content, so those groups are now going to become targets. Or those groups are just going to pack their shit and move into a bigger group, and now you have the issue where you're consolidating a lot of smaller groups into bigger groups, which is something that I don't think is healthy for the game. Or they just leave.
Right.
And that is the worst of it.
And I think that's what's indicative of that is going back to the beginning. You being one of the only or very few wormholer candidates this year versus last year, but what I've seen is a lot of ex-wormholers. Like I said, a lot of people that can claim wormhole experience. They were wormholers, and now they're not. And that is its own interesting data point, I think.
I had a really good conversation last week with Ithaca.
Yeah, he's one of the people I was thinking about.
He talked about how he really enjoyed living in wormhole space, and then it got to the point where it just was not fun for him anymore. And I know there are a lot of people like that even people who we've recently had join our group who have said, for whatever reason, I was driven out of wormhole space either because the game wasn't fun for me anymore, or my playstyle changed, or just was not working for me at a certain point. And I want to come back and I want to give it another shot. Those people are few and far between, the ones that actually come back. But if you make simple, educated changes to the game, or find ways to, make those changes in such a way that doesn't straight up annihilate certain gameplay styles, you're going to have people eventually want to come back.
Right.
Well, so sorry, go ahead.
We're getting we're now
past
the threshold. So, but I do want to, I guess, to kind of bring home what we've been talking about. If you could only pick one of the two, do you think that the solution to making wormholes popular again be adding new attractions to wormholes, i.e., making it more lucrative for people, or do you think it's about making people resistant to evictions, therefore making people feel like they can make a foothold? Which one do you think will be more productive for getting people to be in wormholes?
I don't think it's either. I don't want to make it sound like this is a cop out. But I don't think it's either of those things. I don't think the issue is that people don't feel like they are able to defend their structures enough, because I have seen with, multiple times, and this is not anecdotally. I could go back and pull up battle reports right now of groups that were smaller than the groups that were attacking them and were able to defend their structures because they were well organized, they had good structures, or they had good systems in place, and they made good diplomatic contacts with groups who could come and assist them. I don't believe that is the issue. By the same token, I don't also believe that the game should turn into an amusement park where CCP hands out attractions for us to all go look at and oogle and ogle over, and then get bored with after a week and leave.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there should be better tools in the game, and I feel like I've gone back to this several times, but I did want to make one more comment about something that Phantomite has said, because I have a lot of disagreements with some things that Phantomite says, but there are some things that he absolutely has nailed, and this is one of them. Eve is not an amusement park. Eve is a sandbox, and we talk about this a lot. But the best stories in Eve and the best content that Eve has to generate is a result of players using the tools CCP has given them to create their own storylines. It has
Right.
not ever been a result of CCP introducing an attraction and then everybody going, "Oh wow, this is going to be great for us."
Well,
But seriously, I mean, all of the best storylines in Eve have been the result of players interacting with other players. You can give people content drivers, but at the end of the day, you have to be willing to step back and let them, you know, play the game the way they want to play the game, and
right.
foster the way they want to play the game too.
Right. And the bet and if you are going to do like a story driven thing, it's more about having an event for people to react to, right? So like I'm thinking the Sancha incursion run up, or invasions, or
Mm-hmm.
even like the dread attacks. Was it like these things, these weren't like a story to experience. It was a thing to react to. And the way that
Sure.
everybody reacted to it was what was important. It
Right.
spun out into all kinds of different stories. I do have a quick question from the chat, which
I
is,
saw that one. Yeah.
how do you feel about the idea of like a lot of alphas complain that they don't have mining options. A lot of alphas want, or a lot of newer players want to be able to feel like they can grow, but then they get told that they need to be Omega in order to mine, and they feel like that's like being gated really quick. Do you feel like alphas should be given access to at least one mining barge?
I don't know if I don't know if I would be able to say confidently one or the other about without having the it's not, that's not something that I've looked at as far as the numbers are concerned. I would say that T1 barges, I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't like the idea that, I mean, ventures are fine, but they also, I feel like if you're an alpha player, you still need to have a certain level of progression. I don't like the idea that if you're mining as an alpha, you only have the one example, you only have the one option, and there are no other options past that. Whereas if you're an alpha, you can you fly a frigate, you can fly a destroyer, you can fly a cruiser,
Right.
you can work your way up to something. But if you're a miner, you have the one option, and that's it. I think I probably I don't like that. But again, how that would work out, how that would look, I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I'm not an expert on the subject matter, and I don't want to pull something out of my ass. But I like progression. I feel like alphas, the fact that they have the option to progression makes them more invested in the game and want to stick around and maybe want to go Omega at some point.
I actually really like
But
the idea of like being allowed to train it to like level 1,
yeah,
so that way the alpha can get all the way into the ship, and then they can like get the job done, and then as soon as they go Omega, they can really feel that essence of power. They don't have to then get into another thing. They can now
right.
immediately train 2, 3, 4, and be doing the thing that they were already doing but better. I think that would be way better of a progression. But either way, that's not what's important. What's important is, of course, the most important question of all: cat ears, yes or no?
Yes, yes. Yes,
That was a
it's
very
yes.
okay. At
It,
first, it sounded kind of strained, but you got more
no,
confident.
yes, people. I mean, this is. Listen, I have said this many times already. Eve markets itself as this gritty, this super gritty, dark space environment where there's evil and darkness and danger around every turn. But at the same time, you have groups like fucking Goon Swarm or the fucking fraternity where their logo is a goddamn panda. You're gonna sit here and tell me that exists in the same universe as a dark, grungy underbelly that only the dead can see the end of. Like, I don't buy that. Let people wear cat ears. They've been asking about it for a long time. I think give them better. Honest to God, give us more clothing options. Period. More aesthetic options. Period. Holy fuck. This is you want to make money, sell stuff people want. I mean that don't. I mean I don't know. I could go. Listen, I don't want to get into this because I seriously will talk for half an hour about it. I know we're out of time.
I
But
like,
CCP,
but I do like
for
your.
fuck's sake, give us stuff that we can wear. Holy shit.
I did. Oh man, I like that. That's an excellent point though about the Alliance logo thing, because like all the way back to Y dot, right? Like I mean, these are the idea of alliances and
Imagine.
alliance logos that break immersion and any sense of like gritty aesthetic that they might be going for, like that ship sailed. You're just now using that as an excuse to not have cat ears.
Imagine
Like
if the top four teams in the Alliance tournament were given the option to create their own line of ship skins or their own line of apparel, and then those were sold as limited edition options on the in the Plex store or in game. You're telling me people wouldn't shell out huge amounts of money to be able to put those ship skins and put those clothing items on their characters? That's wild. And if you say it's not true, you're a goddamn liar.
and more to the point, actually right on the point there, in a world in which we accept Vidra Reloaded as a name, but yet we can't accept like
I mean,
something
my
brash.
group is named Turbo Feed or Glory. It's absolutely just. I mean, fucking joke names all over the place. People, eh, like, get over yourselves. Like the game can be a gritty, dark space simulator, while at the same time having options for people to express their creativity in a way that makes CCP money.
Yes,
You can do both, and they right now are only doing one and pretending like the other's impossible, and they are lying to themselves.
that
So
is that is a fascinatingly good point. I've heard a lot of different reasons, but that's a good one. I like to think that like around, especially around 2019, especially, but over this period of transition, we've also seen a transition away from that Warhammer gritty aesthetic standard to a Blade Runner Neo or like cyberpunk
yes,
kind of aesthetic,
yes.
and I think that I'm here for it personally.
You only have to look around at the world around you today to come to the conclusion that at some point in the distant future we will still have an abundance of lunacy active and present in the universe, and denying that for the sake of denying people bunny ears or fucking cat ears on their character is a joke, and they are just losing money. They're just losing money. So
Well,
I I seriously could talk for hours, but
yeah.
I know
No,
we're
well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Let me tell you, because like I know I've said that to a lot of interviews, but like I did not get the answers out of you that I expected to get. I'll put it that way, And I think that it's what I can appreciate is your ability, especially in a world in which like the big scare about wormholers is that it's factioned and therefore might not be able to get a vote in. It would I would assume that the strategy would be to try to like placate as much as possible to build your base or whatever. But no, you're principled. You have your position, and I think that you've presented them very well. And I think that anybody who hears that and resonates with it, uh, is probably thinking it through, and B should vote for you because
I've been
you represent
I've
it
been
well.
very very brash about some of my concerns and issues in the past, and there are going to be people who look at that and think I'm talking out of my ass. And I would like to think that I've explained myself, clearly to the people who have those concerns. But at the end of the day, there are going to be people who do not think I'm the best choice for wormholers. And I'm not their dad. I'm not going to sit here and tell them who to vote for. I would ask that they vote for me. But at the end of the day, it's their decision. I know for a fact that wormholers do not like to be placated, and they don't like to feel like somebody is talking down to them or just giving them a hand. Palms for the poor.
Milquetoast
They're not
answers
interested.
that
Yeah,
like
they're
to
not
try to
interested.
curb your bets.
No, they're not interested in half measures or half-assed attempts at placating them. They want people to be direct and people to be honest, and try and fix the fucking game, because we're all here for the same reason. We all want the game to be good. There's not a single person playing it right now who does not want the game to be as good as possible. If not for them, then for the most people possible. And I strongly believe that we're not at the point yet where we can't still pull out of the nosedive. I still think there's a rich environment to be had here, and that there are changes that can be made that can fix this thing. But I also feel that at least for wormholers and at least for JSpace, it starts with having a seat at the table so we can address those issues with the developers directly and clearly. And even if they decide to take none of this, at face value, and they do nothing with any of this, any of this information we have gathered, at least there will be somebody there to scream and yell and cry when they torpedo us, and we don't get any better.
It was asked in chat. Ashy is having a town hall. Will Mark be there? And I'm actually gonna follow up with that question with, do you feel like you will be able to convince her to be happy with your answers?
Convince Ashy to be happy with my answers?
Yeah,
I believe that. I do. We have Ashy has been one of the. I'm going to link something here real quick,
because the reason why I say that is because, like, if I could think of an icon for the people that are upset about these changes, Ashy's probably to the top of it. That's why I asked that question that way.
Yeah. I have spoken with an abundance of people about these issues. Sorry about the link.
No, it's fine. I got it.
I have spoken to high-class CEOs. I've spoken to people who live in high-class space. I've spoken to people who live in low-class space and their CEOs. I've spoken to ex-players of the game, people who have come back and then left again. And Ashy is one of those people who has kind of seen it all between living in high class and living in low class and being a CEO and being a line member. And her comments have been important to me. And, she has some things that I disagree with, certainly. But I think those are the kind of people that we need to rely on. People who have ideas, at least people who can explain their ideas. And, we have talked at length in the past about some of the concerns we've had, her and I, and Teddy, who she is engaged to. We've had a lot of discussions about this. So yes, I feel like that town hall is going to be great, not just for wormholers, but for everybody. I recommend everybody show up to see it. We're going to have a lot of great names there. I think Stitch Canelin's going to be there, who is another great candidate that everybody should be voting for. I think Phantomite's going to be there, if I'm not mistaken, and he is another great candidate that everybody should probably be voting for. Who else is? I think she said Ithaca? She has anyone else listed? Ithaca is probably, yes. I think Ithaca is going to be there, right. Which again is another great candidate that everybody should be considering. These are all like, it is a wormholer town hall. It's open to everybody, and I strongly recommend as many people show up to watch it as possible. If nothing else, it will be entertaining, and hopefully people can get something out of it too.
Well, when a candidate says that I talk to a lot of people, in your case, I absolutely believe you. You've demonstrated your capabilities today, if nothing else, and our runtime is probably going to represent that. But no, it's been an absolute delight to talk to you. If anything, it just shows that we should chat more often, because we've got a lot to talk about. You're a really smart dude. So
I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to come out here and do this thing. You guys provide an essential service for what we're trying to do here, and can't thank you enough.
Yeah, and thank you all for watching. If you're on YouTube, especially, thank you for getting this far. Before you leave, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to help out those algorithm gods. If you have any questions, go ahead and link them down, or you post them down below, or on his forum post, which will be linked in the doobly-doo down below. But either way,
you can also find me. I'm on Discord. You can find me at DJ Cactus with K's instead of C's. Hashtag 0001. I can also be reached at executor@turbofeederglory.com if you want to send me an email for some reason. Or I guess you could show up to my house. That'd be kind of weird, but I will talk to you there too.
Don't show up at his house. We're not going to condone that.
Okay,
unless you mean
enough.
like his Astrohoose. You can show up to his
at
Astrohoose.
my space house for sure. Yeah. No doubt. So
well, either way, it's been a blast. Thank you again. But on behalf of Mark Resurrectus and myself, Ash Rothi, the voice of New Eden, thank you all for watching, and until next time, we'll see you in space.
take it easy, friends and fellows.